Hey guys, today I want to talk about 6 reading habits that will change your life. These are the things that if you build them into your life on a consistent basis, it is not possible for your life to not get better. Okay, real quick beforehand, the 6 rules that we're going to talk about are read more, read better, read stories, read deeply, read the opposite, and speak up. So this whole video is based on a book called Reader Come Home. And in this book, Marianne talks about there's 3 lives of the reader. The first life is the life where we're reading to gather information and acquire knowledge, right? This is like the reading that we do in school. It's just we're reading to learn something basic that we have to learn for life, right? The second life that we have is that we're reading to escape. We're reading to set aside the normal life that we live and be swept up and away into some other story. It doesn't matter whether that story is a beautiful and wonderful, happy story, or if it's a terrible story. And it doesn't even matter if that story is a fictional story or a true story, right? We can get just as wrapped up and carried away in reading a biography of someone who actually did live and finding ourselves wrapped up in the time that they lived and the world that they lived in as we can reading a fantasy novel that's in a totally separate world or a sci-fi novel that's not even on Earth, right? Both of those lives of reading are good, but in order to actually change our life, we need to go to the third life of reading. And this is the life of intentional reflective reading. And in this life, what we do is we take either that book that we're reading for just the knowledge that we need to gather, or the book that we're reading to be immersed in that other world. And instead of just reading them on a surface level for whatever that they are, just to acquire random facts or to get swept away on a story for a little bit, we actually take the time to really think critically about what's happening in there, to empathize with the characters that we're reading about, and then to reflect on how what is in that story and the things that we're learning from that story can affect our real life in the here and now. That third life is really what I want to talk about. That's what these rules are. This is how do we build a practice of reading in that third life of really reflective, deep reading. The first rule is we're going to read more. The fact of the matter is that you can't read deeply if you don't ever read at all. I believe that no matter who you are, no matter how much you're reading, you should be reading more than you are, right? Because reading is one of the best things that we know to help improve our life as a whole. So no matter who you are and no matter how much you read, you will benefit if you read more. One of the main things that Marianne talks about in this book is this idea that the neural pathways that are required for deep reading utilize critical analysis, they utilize reflection, and they utilize empathy. These neural pathways don't exist by default in the brain, and the only way that we can actually scientifically prove that you develop them is through deep reading. But if those things don't exist without deep reading, what that means is if you never learn to read deeply, or if you once read deeply but then stopped, those neural pathways are going to disintegrate. Right? They don't exist by default. They're not hardwired into your brain. So the very first thing we have to do, no matter who you are, no matter how much you read, is we have to read more. But as soon as we start reading more, we get to the second rule, which is that we have to read better. We can't just read more quantity if the quality isn't there. If I'm reading something that doesn't have anything to offer, I can't, no matter how hard I can't dig anything out of it, right? I'm not going to find a vein of gold in an iceberg, right? So it's the same thing with books. As we start to choose out books and we start to figure out what we're going to read, we have to have discernment to understand, is this a place where I'm likely to find something of value, right? One of the problems that people have with this is they take this to mean that I'm like, you can't read for fun ever. And I'm like, dude, I don't know what you were talking about. I read for fun. Like 90% of my reading is for fun. What people mean when they mean reading for fun is reading without using their brain. They just want to read a story and just accept it and woohoo, right? That's the thing that I'm talking about. That is the actual fluff that we need to not do. What reading for fun should be is reading a book that is fun and that isn't necessarily hard, but that still has something to offer, right? So two really easy examples that I think of for this. I read a book by Tim Hawkins, who's a comedian, and I've read a couple by Jim Gaffigan as well, right? And these books are they're literally books by comedians. They are funny books. They are supposed to be funny. They are supposed to be just a book that you read to laugh, right? But within that, there is wisdom that both of these men have and these nuggets of understanding about human nature and about life that beneath the surface of the funniness of it, there's stuff that you can dig out that's just like, oh, man, that's so good, right? And then same thing with reading for fun. One of my favorite series is the Orphan X series by Greg Hurwitz. This is a series about an ex-assassin. Somebody could so easily get on their high horse, and be like, there's nothing to learn from this, but they're not trying to teach any moral lessons, right? He's just trying to tell a good story. But within that, there's nuggets of gold that you can dig out of it, of the rules that Evan Smoke follows and the commandments that he follows, and sitting here and going, okay, like this is a commandment, but when should you break that commandment? Should that commandment always be obeyed? Or now he's in this situation where the commandments don't actually align, and instead of just being able to blindly follow these commandments that he's followed for forever, now he's kind of like, but what about now, right? So it's not this thing of you can't read for fun or you can't read fiction or whatever. That's complete bogus. It's this idea of you need to be able to have discernment to choose things that are likely to have something good to offer you. And the last point that I want to add on this, I'm going to kind of harp on this one because it's a big one, right? A lot of people, Christian people especially, they love to use this story of the dog poop and the brownies. And they will look at whatever book it is, and they will say, but that has some sex in it, or that has some language in it, or that has something, and they'll say you shouldn't read that because there's something bad in it. And if you want to know why, imagine this. Imagine your dad cooked some brownies for you. He offered them to you and he said, okay, but just so you guys know, I put a little bit of dog poop in the brownies. Then you're like, oh my gosh, I wouldn't eat the brownies, right? And they're like, so why would you read this book or watch this movie or do whatever with this story, have any interaction with this story that has something bad in it? That is the most bogus argument that anyone could make. We're going to tear that down right now. That whole story, it's all based on this assumption that you can find perfect brownies, right? That's the underlying assumption is you're not going to eat the brownies with dog crap in them. You're going to wait for dad to make the brownies that don't have dog crap in them, and then you should eat those, right? So this underlying assumption is that there is something out there that doesn't have anything bad in it. But the fact of the matter is that we live in a fallen world. So there is no such thing as perfect brownies. Everything has some taint in it from fallen, sinful nature. So you cannot look at a thing and be like, oh, I'm not going to read that book because, a great example, Anna Karenina, one of my favorite novels of all time. That's a book about adultery, and adultery is bad. Yeah, it is. Obviously, no one's arguing that. But if you don't read that book, you're literally missing out on one of the greatest novels ever written, and on a novel that has so much good and so much life-altering lessons and examples and gives you an understanding of yourself and the mentality of how you can fall down into this trap of self-deceit, and lays it out in a way that is unparalleled to anything else that I've ever read, right? So we're not going to sit here and be like, oh, anything that's fun is not good. And we're not going to sit here and be like, oh, anything that has anything bad in it, we can't read that because that's not good either. Our goal is to find the good inside of the places that we're likely to find it, right? So on to topic 3, because I just go on forever on that. Rule 3, read stories. For guys especially, we tend to get caught up in this, I want to read nonfiction. I want to read, tell me how to do it. I want to read the how-to thing, and I don't want to read some fluffy story, I don't want to read Redeeming Love. I don't want to read Anna Karenina. I don't need none of that, right? And the fact of the matter is that stories are one of the most powerful catalysts to learning that we have. This is why Jesus spoke in parables all the time, because our brains function well interpreting stories and placing ourselves in the position of the characters. And so this is a tendency that I have. It's a tendency that a lot of guys that I know have. One of the reasons why people think that stories aren't as good or fiction isn't as good as nonfiction, or it's like, oh, like fiction is just for fun, right? Is because they choose crappy fiction, right? There is not much that you're going to be able to mine out of 50 Shades of Grey. I'm just going to say it, right? There's not a whole lot. You're digging for gold on an iceberg. Like you might find you might find some kind of fossil thing that's like maybe cool, whatever, but like you're just not going to find much reading 50 Shades of Grey. Reading Anna Karenina, you could reread that book every year for the rest of your life and dig something out of it that will change your actual life, right? So the reason why people discount stories is because they read crappy stories. And a lot of that, honestly, is because most people are only reading stuff that's written recently, and a lot of the stuff that's written recently is not good. There's plenty of stuff that is. Don't get me wrong. There's plenty of stuff that is. I think Brandon Sanderson and The Way of Kings, the Stormlight Archive books, they're some of my favorite books of all time. And if I could reread that whole series every year and still have time to read other things, I would, because those books are gold mines and you can dig so much out of those books. But in general, what people read is not great stuff. They're digging for gold on icebergs, right? So we're going to read stories, but we're going to use that discernment that we talked about in Rule 2 to choose a story that's more likely to give us something great out of it. Rule 4 is we're going to read deeply. We're going to read with a pen. We're going to underline. We're going to write stuff in the margins. We're going to put our thoughts. We're going to argue with the author. We're going to do all this stuff. And we're not just going to sit here and just blandly, right? This is why it's so helpful to read with a friend or read with a group, or even if you're not reading the same book with someone, talk about what you're reading with somebody and share your ideas. My wife and I recently read The Count of Monte Cristo together, and it was so much fun to discuss it as we were going along and be like, oh man, okay, like what do you think is going to happen with this? And like one of the best things of that whole point was we were sitting here going, man, like I want to love this guy, but he seems so good, but he's so slimy, and he's so you forget that he's on this revenge mission because he seems so nice and he seems so like he has everyone else's best interest at heart, but really like he's here to just tear down their whole life. And I don't know how this is going to end. Like, I don't know if either at the end, like something's going to happen to change to make me be okay with how much I love him, or I'm going to like simultaneously love him and hate him. And like, I don't even know what to do with this. Right. And so it's so good to dig into the things that you're reading and actually apply them into your life. And this is the whole third life thing, right? We're not just reading just to enjoy a story. We're not just reading just to gain facts and knowledge. We're really reading to see, how does this apply to my life right now? Rule 5, we're going to read the opposite. Once we've done these other things, there's a reason this comes later on, right? Once we've done these other things and we've built up these practices of how to read better, we're going to start reading stuff that is the opposite of what we think. Again, a terrible, terrible habit that Christians have is we sit here and we're like, oh, don't read the Da Vinci Code because you might lose your faith if you read the Da Vinci Code, or if you read a book by an atheist, like, oh, okay? If your faith is so shallow and so insecure that reading the Da Vinci Code makes you lose your faith, you really had bigger problems to begin with, okay? So one of the things that we need to do is, as we are doing this, reading more, reading better, reading stories, reading deeply, we're building up our ability to think, and we're building up our ability to understand why we have the convictions that we have, right? And we're building up our ability to sustain engaging with someone who doesn't agree with us without crumbling under their thought. It's a very strange thing that you look at people who are not Christians. They've thought a lot about why they're not Christians, and they've thought a lot about why they don't believe the Bible, and they've thought a lot about all this. And so many of us sit here and we haven't actually put any mental effort into it. We never really dug into, why do I believe this? And why do I believe this, but not that? And why does this make sense to me, but this doesn't, right? And so what we're starting to do is, as we're digging into all these other things and building up to this, now that we've started to firm up our foundation, now what we're going to do is we're going to go intentionally seek out the opposite of whatever it is that we believe. So if you're a Christian, go read the best arguments by people who aren't Christians. If you're a Republican, go read whatever it is that liberals say are the best books by a liberal person, right? Or if you're a liberal, go read the best books by whatever Republican author. And we're going to intentionally seek out to read things that we disagree with. Because one, we want to find out, is there something that I'm missing? And if I'm presented to it, will I be like, oh my gosh, wow, like that actually makes a lot of sense. I don't know why I never saw that way, right? Or two, can I take the big arguments from this other side of whatever it is that I don't believe, and can I learn to better articulate why I don't believe those things and why I don't agree with those things? And what that does is then the next time that you have the opportunity to have a conversation with someone that you disagree with, not yelling back and forth and not calling people idiots just because they don't believe what you believe, right? You can actually have an intelligent conversation that says, okay, yeah, so I know that you believe this kind of thing because X, Y, Z. And that actually makes sense, but I think that because of ABC, XYZ doesn't really actually apply. I actually did this by accident one time, and it was still one of my favorite experiences. I read this book called The Deficit Myth. And I didn't even realize at the time that it was polar opposite of all the other economics books that I was reading. And this book is totally only about modern monetary theory, right? And when I was reading it, the thing that struck me was, I was like, oh my gosh, I get now why people think that modern monetary theory makes sense. Because for 80% of the theory, it does make sense. Like, it is true. It's based on things that are actually factual and true. But then in that last 20%, it makes some assumptions that I don't think are logical. Right? And so now I can have a conversation with someone that's not arguing about this tiny little section of the actual truth of modern monetary theory, because there is truth to this thing and there is facts that it's based on. And it's not the facts that I disagree with. It is a fact that the government can print however much money that they want. They are not like a normal consumer. I can't sit here and be like, oh, modern monetary theory is dumb, because it's not. It's based on a fact. It's just once we get past those facts and we start making assumptions and inferences from those facts, that's where my logic takes me in a different direction than someone else's who is a full supporter of modern monetary theory. So reading the opposite allows us to shore up our own thinking. It allows us to find ways where our thinking is deficient and hopefully change it, because if you never change your mind on something, you're not doing something right. And then it allows us to have a civil conversation and not just yelling and screaming and calling each other names on social media. Rule 6, last one. If you are still here, you are a freaking champ. The last one is speak up, right? And this is just this idea that you haven't really learned something until you can teach it. What we do when we're living at these earlier lives is someone says something, or we read a truth, or we take in a story, or we go to church and we hear the sermon and yeah, that's good. Preach. And then we go on about our day and nothing ever changes. Nothing ever gets any different. And we don't do anything with that knowledge. So on all these previous other steps, we've taken all this, we've learned to synthesize it, we've learned to dig into it, we've learned how to read the opposite and shore up our own thinking. And then we're going to take this, we're going to internalize it, we're going to change our life with it. And then we're going to not be afraid to speak up and tell other people about it and share it with other people. This is the reason why I started this whole YouTube channel, was I sat here and I have this massive conviction for the past year. Dude, you've read 1,500 books. You've learned a lot. You have an ability to read in a way that a lot of other people don't have. You need to share that and help other people read better. And so you can go through all this plethora of things and give them the best nuggets out of it and encourage them to read more in their own life. It's speak up, it's write about it, it's think about it, it's talk about it, and it's actually ingest these things and try to teach it to someone else and help them change their life because you've ingested all this stuff and it's changed your life, and now you're going out and trying to help someone else change their life. So there you have it. 6 habits. It was a lot. I'm proud of you. If you're still here, I forgive you if you're not. And let me know what you guys think. If you have something that you would add to this, if you have thoughts on any of these, leave me a comment below. I would love to know what you think. I would love to know your opinions, whether you think I'm a genius or a moron. Let me know. I'm good with either one. And I think that's all I have for now. So I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.